Okay, welcome to Module 14 of the Network Security Fundamentals series, which we will be talking about cybersecurity resilience. Hopefully, by the end of this module, you will be able to define business continuity, describe how to achieve resilience through redundancy, explain what a policy is, and describe different types of security policies. To begin with, let's address the elephant in the room. When we talk about business continuity and resiliency, we literally are talking about redundancy. So everything goes back to redundancy and backups. So expect to hear a lot about those topics while we are going through this set of slides, right? So business continuity is an organization's ability to maintain operations after a disruptive event. So the goal is make sure we have all the measures in place so that in case of a failure, in case of a mishap, business can continue doing business. A BCP, or a business continuity plan, is a strategic document that provides alternative modes of operation for business activities. To create the BCP, you need to first be able to identify what are the threats and what is the possibility of those threats to happen. So basically, you need to come up with a risk calculation initially, and then prioritizing those risks. And then based on the risks that you prioritize, you have to create a preventative and recovery procedure that can help you in case of any of those vulnerabilities being exploited by the threats. And finally, testing those to determine if they're sufficient is closing the process of generation of the BCP. These tests can be tabletop, can be simulations, or can be walkthroughs, right? In any case, you need to test your business continuity plan and go from there. A BCP generally has three goals: business recovery planning, making sure your business can come back to operational situation after a mishap; crisis management and communication, so defining that what are the means of communications while a mishap happens, right? How would you communicate between different entities within your company in case of a failure, and how would you manage this crisis? And finally, the disaster recovery is a part of it. So in case that the mishap is so catastrophic that it's going to take you down, take the entire company down, how would you recover from that? Which in this case, we're going to call it a disaster. A BCP is going to talk about high availability, making sure you do have enough redundancies so that in case of a failure on a device, another device is available to take over. A scalability, making sure if your business demands are going up and now you're demanding more resources, you can scale up and that's not going to cause any issue with the performance or providing the service. Diversity, basically just betting on different solutions for conducting the same task. And then discussing over how the backups and how the redundancies are going to be. Are those going to be on-prem devices that take over for the other device's failure, or those are going to be the cloud-based devices that take over for the same? Continuity of Operation Planning, or COOP, is a federal initiative to encourage organizations to address how critical operations will continue under a broad range of negative circumstances, including the national and international crises that may happen in case of any kind of exposure to the threats. One of the first steps yet that you take is identifying the risks, right? And within the realm of identifying the risk and threats that you're dealing with, you're going to conduct something that's called BIA, or Business Impact Analysis. A BIA identifies business functions first and quantifies the impact a loss of these functions may have on business operations. For example, think of a utility company that distributes power to a region. So in case of their distribution system going down, the entire region is going to be out of power. And that being out of power is going to impact a lot more businesses in the area which are relying on a on a utility company services. Like for example, think about a patient who is undergoing an open heart surgery in a hospital, which is receiving power from this utility company. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is from financial perspective, right? So what are the consequences, financial consequences of loss of a function in case of a mishap, right? And that's what happens during the BIA. So you analyze all the possible impacts on the business, which are going to affect the enterprise. These range from impact on the property. Those could be tangible asset impacts, right? A wall is broken, a computer is blown, a screen is broken, stuff like that. Impact on the finance, monetary funding. This can also be taxes and lawsuits and legal losses and all that. Impact on the safety, physical protection of the enterprise, impact on reputation or the status of the company. Just think about the company that's supposed to keep your information safe. And now during a data breach, all of the personal information is exposed to the bad actors. In that case, people are not going to trust that entity as easy as they used to do before, and their reputation is going to be damaged. Also impact on life, as we just talked about the surgery, that open heart surgery example that we talked about, right? So impact of life is also the other one. All in all together, looking at all the aspects of the impact that can happen, a business impact analysis is going to get completed. The result of which will help determining the mission essential functions, which is the activity that serves as the core purpose of the enterprise. Basically prioritizing different functionalities based on the impact that they're going to have in case those vulnerabilities are being exploited or a failure happens in the system due to a quality of a hardware or something like that. A BIA can also help in identification of critical systems that support the mission essential functions, like within a company. For say the example that we were talking about, within a utility company, power generation and power distribution will have a higher priority when it comes to the impact analysis in comparison with, let's say, the billing system, right? Also, identifying a single point of failure is what happens in this process, which a single point of failure is a component or a system that will disable the entire system should it no longer function. And usually what we want to do is we want to minimize the existence of these single failure points and make sure we have high availability through redundancy that we apply and reduce the number of single point of failures. So a disaster recovery plan, or a DRP, focuses on protecting and restoring information technology functions. So let's say if the redundancies in place did not help protecting the system and continuing of the business, then a disaster happens per se. And a DRP is the response to a disaster in that case. A DRP is a written document detailing all the processes for restoring IT resources following a disruptive event. Comprehensive in scope, a DRP is intended to be a detailed document that is updated regularly, especially when a failure happens and we learn from that failure. We just feed back to the DRP and we redesign the DRP so that we are ready for such failures in future. Otherwise, through the tests and exercises, we test the DRP more often and update it accordingly. Most DRPs cover a common set of topics, right? One common topic is the sequence in restoring the systems or order of restoration. This is really important because one of the times that your system is really vulnerable is during a restore process, right? Let's say if um, your network is down, one of the first things that you have to bring back up before you actually connect the other stuff to the network and bring them up are the firewalls, which define the perimeter of the network. If you don't do so, if you bring the firewalls on at the end, or if you bring the antiviruses on at the end, then you have a network which is up and running, connected to the internet per se, and then there is no protective measure in place to protect your network against possible bad actors out there, right? And a DRP has an order of restoration to make sure that you are coming back on in a safe and secure way. So first, the critical protective systems are going to be restored, and then the core business systems are going to be restored so that they are protected as they get connected to the internet. This means which systems should have the priority and be restored before the other systems in case of a failure. So as we said initially, resilience comes through redundancy, right? And the fault tolerance is a concept that refers to systems' ability to deal with malfunctions and failures. The solution to the fault tolerance is to build in redundancy, which is the use of duplicated equipment to improve the availability of a system. We measure that availability with mean time to recovery measure, right? The MTTR is the average amount of time that it will take a device to recover from a failure that is not a terminal failure. Let's say if you need to restart a device to recover back to the operational state, the time that it takes for your device to be restarted and you average it out after multiple tries, that's the MTTR time that you put into consideration. Redundancy planning can involve redundancy for endpoints, servers, disks, networks, power supply, physical sites, and the data or information within your network. When it comes to the endpoints, the downtime from a user's endpoint is not really as critical as that for the servers or disks or your network. So you can really just put your focus on the more important aspects of your network, like Active Directory domain services server, right? Or your network protection services rather than a laptop of a user, right? In the event of a software issue, many operating systems have a feature known as revert to last known good configuration state, to a specific state in which it is possible to roll back the clock and go back to the last time you had a system which was working without any problem. This usually is used by the actual users when the users are facing a failure due to a change in the system. For example, when you update to a new patch and the patch is causing failure for your system, what you can do is you can go back to the configuration menu and just revert to last known good configuration state of your system, which is going to bring you back on. To protect an endpoint from malware infections, programs are available that can actually freeze a computer to prevent it from accepting any changes from any kind of possible malware that can attack the computer, which in that case, the computer is going to be non-persistent. There are multiple software and hardware tools that they can work around the issue of the endpoint resiliency. But I want you to remember that endpoint resiliency is one of the lower priority, let's say, resiliency plans when it comes to an enterprise system. More important ones are servers, right? And those who provide specific services to the network. Servers themselves play the key role in the network infrastructure. Without them, your network is not working. Loss of one or more servers can have significant business impact, as we discussed, can be financially or can be reputational or anything. Uh, the new technologies, virtualization, hypervisor, and such, can basically help with the issue of the resiliency and redundancy so that it is transparent to the user. So user doesn't see how the resiliency is provided, but the technology behind the scene is taking that over. When you use a cluster, when you use virtualization, basically you create the cluster of servers and the background, right? Clustering itself consists of combining two or more devices to appear as a single unit. Your hypervisor is looking into 10 physical servers, but your users looking through the interface of the hypervisor just see one server that provides the service to them. A server cluster is the combination of two or more servers that appear just a single server to your user, and those are connected through public and private cluster connections. They can provide services to the outside users in the public manner, or they can provide it to the internal users in a private manner. There are two types of server clusters. You have symmetric and asymmetric server clusters. In an asymmetric server cluster, a standby server performs no function except to be standby. So they're just ready. They're just sitting there in the cluster. They're not handling any load. They're not taking over any task. They're just there in case of a failure. They take over for the job of the server which has failed. All servers do useful work in the symmetric server cluster, though. That's the biggest difference, right? So if no server is standby, you have a symmetric one. All of them are actually doing work. And if one of them fails, remaining servers can take the work that that failed server is supposed to do. This is the case that, for example, think about a physical hardware that is taking care of your mail and print services, and another one that is doing Active Directory and DHCP, but they're both doing work. They both have the services of the other one set up on them. So in case one fails, the other one can take over the roles and address those roles till this service comes back up. Virtualization has impacted the number of server clusters that are needed for server redundancy and disaster recovery, because we can virtualize many servers into just one virtual server through the clustering, right? There are tools available so that as one virtual machine is shut down, a copy of that virtual machine is automatically spawned up. We call this replication, right? So in virtualization, we basically have everything as a VM. You don't have a physical entity as a server that you can refer to and say, hey, this is server number one. You do have a VM, and you can have clones of that VM, right? And in case of a failure, when that server shuts down or gets corrupted, you replicate it with another server that you spawn up and has the same information. You may not have some of the information which was last changed on that server, where you have actually solutions for taking backups and have the live backups, which in that case, the new spawn up server virtual machine can go and read from that live backup and actually act exactly as the corrupted and failed server used to act. This slide is actually showing you an example of a server cluster. As you can see, server 1 and 2 are using a shared disk in a server cluster, and through the public server connection, they are available to the clients. Each of these clients doesn't see which server is hardware is taking care of their job or task. They just see a server cluster that is providing the service. So in case one of these guys fails, the other one is now available to take care of the job that they were supposed to do. Next, let's talk about the disks and resiliency through redundancy of the disk. Some of the topics we're going to talk about, we have discussed it before on the RAID, right? But anyway, there are two hardware redundancies methods for disks. And we do have the RAID, or redundant array of integrated disks. And then we do have the SAN, storage area network multipath. A trend in data storage is to use the solid state drives because those are more resistant to failure and are considered more reliable than traditional HDDs due to the fact that these are not mechanical. HDDs are often the first components to fail because you have mechanical movement, and mechanical movement is doomed to failure due to physics laws anyway. Some organizations keep spare hard drives on hand so they can just swap the hard drives, especially if they're using RAID or any kind of backing up methodology. When swapping of the hard drives, they can get their job done. Mean time between failures, or MTBF, measures the average time until a component fails and must be replaced, right? So basically you have this understanding of hard drives purchased from whatever vendor. I don't want to name a vendor here. Whatever vendor are going to fail after 5 years of working or after transferring this amount of data. So if you have that calculation, if you have that data, now you can plan based on that, because you know, okay, usually within every 6 months you have to change these hard drives or anything like that. That also can help you determining how many spare hard drives you need to have in hand for how long, right? You always want to have 2 or 3 in hand to be able to address those issues. Redundant array of independent devices, or RAID, uses multiple hard disk drives to increase reliability and the performance. RAID can be implemented through software or through the hardware, which are the hard drive controllers. Several levels of RAID exist. What we will review here quickly is, I believe, 0, 1, and 5, because rest of them we already have discussed before. If anyone watching this video has a question about those, please go back to the other videos posted here. And we do have very detailed videos discussing the RAID. RAID level 0, or stripped disk array without fault tolerance, is just used for making a single disk from multiple disks, right? There is no fault tolerance here. It's just combining all the disks and virtualizing them so that they look like one disk. Stripping partitions hard drive into a smaller section, and then data is written to the strips and alternated across different drives. If one drive fails in RAID 0, all data on the drive is actually lost, and there's no way for you to be able to recover that. What you see here is RAID 0. As you can see, information here, we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You see that the order, this is how we copy the files. Consider each alphabet letter a file. Now think about disk 2 fails. So B, F, J, and N are now actually failed, and there is no way to retrieve that information in RAID 0 because there is no copy on any other drive within the same setting. To address that issue, we're using RAID 1 for mirroring, right? Disk mirroring involves connecting multiple drives to the same disk controller card. Remember, just one controller card, and action on the primary drive is duplicated on the other drive. Primary drive can fail, or even your secondary drive can fail, right? Any of those can fail. And the data will not be lost because you do have a copy on the other drive. Disk duplexing is a variation of RAID level 1. That separate controller cards are used for each disk. So now you have redundancy even on the controller card, and it protects against controller card failures. So in the normal level 1 RAID, you have one controller controlling multiple disks. You have redundancy for the disk failure, but not for the controller card failure. And disk duplexing, though, you do have that redundancy for the controller card failure because you're using one controller card per disk. RAID level 5, or independent disk with distributed parity, distributes the parity, which is the error checking measure, across all drives. Data is stored on one drive, and its parity information is stored on another drive. So when you recover from a disaster, you basically have the parity on the other drive that you can make sure the data that you restored is in keeping the integrity because you can compare it with the parity. What you see here is RAID level 1, and you can see these two disks are mirroring each other, and these two are mirroring each other. So we have a copy of A on disk 2. So the only way to lose file A is for you to lose both disk 1 and disk 2 at the same time. And if mechanical failure or disk failure happens on both of them, now your file is lost. But if you lose, per se, disk 2 and disk 4 at the same time, you still have all of your information intact because another copy is on another disk. Over here, we are looking at RAID level 5. As you can see, we do have a file like file A, which is on this disk, right? And the parity is going to be on this disk, right? Then you do have file B over here, and the parity is going to be on this disk. So basically, the parity of the file is residing on another disk. Again, we do have videos for explanation of the RAID. Please refer to those videos for more detailed information. It's about an hour of explanation about the RAID. So another method for storage resiliency is using the SAN with multipath. Storage area network, or SAN, is a dedicated network storage facility that provides access to data storage over a high-speed network. So this is like your, let's say, my clouds or personal clouds that you purchase, which are hard drives that you install in your home as a standalone entity, and you connect them to the network. Actually, some of those have ports available, so you can add more disk drives, more physical drives to the device. But at the end of the day, you see them as just one entity. One of the good examples for home use is the TrueNAS, the free version of TrueNAS that you can take and have a storage area network generated in your home. SANs consolidate different storage facilities such as a disk array, tape libraries, optical jukeboxes, SSDs, flash drives, you just name it, into just one big pool. And from users' perspective, this is virtualized into just a storage. And the SAN manager decides how to distribute the information amongst all of these storage possibilities so that it keeps the highest availability, highest performance, and highest resiliency. The different storage facilities appear as just one single pool of locally attached devices for your computer. So as a user, you don't see anything happening behind the scene. For you, it's like, okay, you have an extra drive on your computer, which is a SAN. Multipath, though, is a technique for creating more than one physical path between devices and a SAN so that they increase the performance, right? And actually they generate redundancy. So in case one path to the SAN is down, a part of your network is down, the other path can actually take over and provides the availability of the storage to you. After talking about endpoint servers, storage areas, the networks, and hard drives, now let's talk about the networks themselves, right? So the network itself is an asset that if it fails, it's going to act as a single point of failure. You can't do anything within a network which is failed, right? No communication is happening. Redundant networks may be necessary due to the critical nature of connectivity. Again, think about that energy distribution center in the utility company as an example. the network that dispatches the energy is so critical that they cannot afford for that network to fail, right? A redundant network waits in the background silently and let the normal operation goes, uses a replication scheme to keep live network information current, like any changes in the network is going to be replicated to this redundant network. And then in case of a disaster, it automatically launches so that the users never really lose all the access to the network. Of course, they're as good as the last synchronization and replication that has happened, but it is usually not a huge deal, right? So they still can have most of the functionalities immediately recovered. If there was a last minute change or something, that's the only one that is being uh, lost because this replication is going to have a time period, right? So you're only as good as the last replication. In this type of redundant networks, hardware components are all duplicated. So if you buy a firewall, you're going to buy two of them. One is going to be for redundant network and is always offline till a disaster happens. And the other one is going to be online, connected to the network, taking care of the tasks that you need to do. The virtual software defined network, or SDN, uh, controls the network reliability. And if you need more reliability in network, it can bring in more devices in. If you need less, it can remove more devices. You also have the NIC teaming, because the network interface cards can be configured also for redundancy, which is called network interface card teaming. And that provides redundancy as well as faster performance on the devices, because now you have multiple NICs, which is like you're adding more lanes to a highway that you're communicating over. Another aspect of redundancy for resilience is the power. If the power goes off, if you're unplugged or disconnected, now again, you cannot have any communication happening. So maintaining power is essential when planning for redundancy, and critical devices can be fitted with a dual power supply in case one power supply fails. The other one is going to take over. Or you can use the UPSs, or uninterrupted power supplies, which they can come in two flavors, offline or online, right? A UPS is a device that maintains power to the equipment in the event of an interruption in primary electrical power source. An offline UPS is not very expensive. It's a simple solution. It is charged by the main power supply, so you connect it to your wall plug and let it charge. It begins supplying the power quickly when primary power is interrupted, and switches back to a standby mode when the primary power is restored. You still may have a delay because this is offline, right? And power surges may happen. However, on an online UPS, it is always running off its battery. So basically, your system is being fed off of the UPS at all the times. Battery is what is providing energy to you. And then the UPS itself is being fed off of the plug. So you plug the UPS to the wall plug, getting electricity into it, and the online UPS then provides power to your devices. So in case of a power failure, you basically don't see any dips or surges in the voltage, because for your device, it is not visible. It's only UPS that sees that. While on an offline situation, the surge is detectable by the device, right? Also, because of the characteristics of it, in which it is providing the power through the battery at all the times, you can use it as a surge protector as well, which adds more resiliency, right? But just remember that UPSs can only supply power for a limited time. It depends on how big of a capacity they have on their batteries. So for that reason, we use a backup generator, which can be powered by any kind of natural or or artificial fuel, right? Diesel, natural gas, propane, whatever. And they include automatic transfer switches that can detect the loss of building's primary power and then switch to the backup generator. So basically, your UPS makes it uninterrupted, and then as soon as it is being detected by the power generators, the backup generators, just start providing power for you. And the only thing you need to do while the power is down to the building is to provide and supply the fuel needed for the power generator to take care of you. One more thing that you can do for resiliency is have a redundant site as a whole. If we're talking about devices, right, so far, how about having a complete site as a redundant site? These recovery sites are the backup sites and maybe necessary if a huge disaster physically impacts the building. There are three types of redundant sites. You have the hot sites, cold sites, and the warm sites. A hot site is generally run by a commercial disaster recovery service and has duplicate of the production site, has all the needed equipment up and running, and data backups can be moved quickly to this hot site. And the hot site even have network connectivity or internet connectivity. So in case of a failure, you just need to move your employees from the actual site to the hot backup site and start conducting the business. So it's virtually seamless, right? It's your business is going to be continuing. You also have the concept of a cold site, which is in contrary to hot site, right? A cold site provides the office space, possibly a bunch of equipment and the boxes in corners, right? But in case of a disaster, you must get in, install the equipments, bring the backups on, and then continue the equipment. It takes a lot of time, but obviously it is way cheaper than maintaining a hot site at all the times. Between cold sites and a hot site, you have the warm sites, which they have all the equipment installed, but no active internet or communication facilities. Of course, you don't have a current data backup. You have to restore your backups there. These are less expensive than hot and more expensive than cold sites. And time to turn on connections and install backups can be half a day or more. But whatever it is, it's going to be way less than what a cold site is giving you. And it's going to be more than what a hot site can be giving you. Again, that goes back to your business impact analysis to make a decision over which one of these sites is needed for your specific business, right? That's the definitive factor. So how about the data itself, right? For the data, we need to go with backup. Backup is the solution for the issue of data resiliency. A data backup is copying information to a different medium and storing it so that it can be used in the event of a disaster. Soon we're going to talk about 3-2-1 rule, which is the rule of backing up, right? Backing up data involves data backup calculations, creating different type of data backups, and then storing those backups in a location that is available easily and readily in case of a disaster. Two elements are used in the calculation of when backups should be performed. First of all, you need to know what is your recovery point objective, which is the maximum length of time your organization can tolerate between backups. Remember, the key here is between backups, system changes. And the changes that system has between backup A and backup B is going to be lost in case of a disaster, because you can only go back to the point that you took backup A. So you're only as good as backup A. RPO is going to give you an idea of how often you need to have a backup. Also, you have the RTO, which is recovery time objective, which is the length of the time it will take to recover backup data. RTO is going to give you an idea of what type of medias you need to have the backup on. How should you connect to the place that you have your backups on so that you can define that recovery time, right? Software that is used to create backups can internally designate which files have already been backed up by setting an archive bit in the properties of the file. So let's go here and talk about it over here. So let's say on Monday, the files are changed. You set the archive bit, you take your file backup, put the backup in the backup place, and then after that, you clear the archive bit back to 0 so that you know, okay, this data is backed up after the change. Note that the change is what changes the archive bit to 1. The day after, the file is not going to have no change. Therefore, the backup bit is going to remain 0 as it was set at the end of backup process on Monday. So on Tuesday, nothing changes. Therefore, the archive bit remains 0, so we don't take no backup and nothing changes. The day after on Wednesday, the file is changed, so we set the archive bit to 1. Then the backup is happening on it, and then we reset it back to 0 and so on and so forth. So this way, we are going to have an incremental backup, which only happens when the file actually changes and not prior to that, right? Again, think about the fact that the backup may happen at 2 p.m. every day. And if the file changes at 1 p.m. and the disaster happens at 1:30 p.m., you're going to lose the information for Tuesday. However, you can go back to Monday and have all the informations over there. A more comprehensive backup technology is known as continuous data protection, or CDP. CDP performs continuous backups that can be stored immediately after the backup is conducted. It maintains a historical record of all changes made to data. Well, CDP creates a snapshot of the data like a reference marker. So at any given point, you know that this snapshot goes to this date, this time, this hour of the system. Of course, you're going to be using more advanced technologies, more advanced backup tools when you want to use CDP. Most organizations store their offsite backups using an online cloud repository. These sites often use CDP to continually back up data, having those snapshots, those last known good configurations back to the cloud, so that in case of a disaster, they're not, I mean, let's say physical disaster, their backups are not gone and done. There are several internet services that provide similar features to these, like automatic continuous backup, universal access, delayed deletion, online or media-based restore. You have all of those features available in most of these online services. Security experts recommend the 3-2-1 backup plan, which means you want to have 3 different copies of backups on at least 2 different types of storage, and one of the backups should be stored at a different location. If this building burns down, if earthquake brings it down or anything, that remote location is going to have a copy of your backup available to you. Now it's time for a quick knowledge check. Let's check your knowledge. Which type of disk drive redundancy uses separate controller cards for each disk and duplicates the contents of one disk to a second disk? Right. The correct answer is disk duplexing. Next thing that we want to discuss about are the policies. So when it comes to business continuity, policies play a big role. These are the known and tested guidelines that turn into a rule so that they protect business against the failure that can happen. A policy itself is a document that outlines the specific requirements or rules that must be met and generally communicates a consensus of judgment, defines appropriate behavior for users, identifies what tools and procedures are needed, and provides directives for human resource action in response to inappropriate behavior, and may be helpful if it is necessary to prosecute violators. So basically, you have to follow the policies or you're in problem. Couple of different type of policies. First and foremost, the account management policies, which are a part of IAM or identity and access management. The account management itself involves restrictions regarding the user accounts, what users can do and what users cannot do. This can be applied through the group policies of the Active Directory, and you can just apply it to all the systems automatically with defining that group policy. A growing set of enforcement technologies is based on the accumulation and analysis of real-time data that is processed in the cloud. So they're looking into what are the trends, and based on those trends, the new policies, the new GPOs are being applied, which then can be used by enterprises through enforcing account management policies. Other types are mobile device location-based policies. It's important that you can use technology in order to identify and enforce policies like geolocating policies, geotagging policies, geofencing policies for, say, this user cannot connect to the network unless their device is within the vicinity of 5 miles from this point or anything like that. It is easy to apply policies that are on the mobile devices because of all the sensors and all the data that you can collect from these devices. Next is personal policies. Separation of duties is a commonly used policy which requires that if a fraudulent application of a process could potentially result in a breach of security, the process should be divided between two or more individuals. Just think about all those old movies that you have seen that there are two keys needed in order to get a nuclear missile shot or launched, right? Or you have seen it in the store. Sometimes if you want to get a specific discount, the cashier needs to call the manager so that they come in and put their password so that you can get that. So these are the policies that you put in, you separate the duties, like for the example of discount, you put that duty in a manager and the cashier has the duty of acting as a teller with you and nothing more than that. Job rotation is another personnel policy that is useful to be applied for security and business continuity. It involves preventing one individual from having too much control, right? It limits the amount of time individuals are in a position to manipulate security configurations, find the loopholes, and abuse them. It also helps expose any potential avenues for fraud by having multiple individuals with different perspectives learn about the job and uncover vulnerabilities. More eyes looking at the same topic gives you more angles and therefore more knowledge and better analysis. Also, another policy is mandatory vacation. Usually an audit of the employee's activity is done while they're away on their mandatory vacation. Also, you can apply a clean desk policy, which is designed to ensure that all confidential or sensitive materials are removed from a user's workspace and secured when the items are not in use. A lot of time, a photo frame on a desk can give up a password, or an object on a desk can give up a security question or something like that. So you want to have minimum amount of items on a desk, on a work desk, and those only should be the items that you want to use for the work and nothing else. We do have the list privilege. a policy, which means that only the minimum amount of privilege necessary to perform a task should be allocated to a user. So they should not be able to do anything more. If they're supposed to just check the emails, you should not allow them to use Internet Explorer or something like that. Just let them use the Outlook for communication and close all other communications to Internet on their devices beside the Outlook. We also have onboarding and offboarding personnel policies. Employee onboarding refers to the tasks associated with hiring a new employee. Usually you do a background check and employee non-disclosure or NDAs. The agreements are typically part of this step, especially if you're a technology company or a company that has intellectual property that can be exposed or revealed by the employees. Then you have employee offboarding, which entails the actions to be taken when an employee leaves an enterprise, like backing up all employee files, archiving their emails for future reviews or anything, forwarding those emails to a manager, disabling the employee's account, and all of those are part of the steps that usually are taken, collecting their mobile devices, collecting their personal devices that they use as BOYD, or at least wiping them off from the company um, data and intellectual property, and such can be applied. Also, we do have the acceptable use policy, which is a policy that defines actions user may perform while accessing systems and network equipment. What can they do with the company phone? What can they install? Actually, some of those can be enforced through technology. Like if you're giving employees an iPhone, you can enforce no installation of apps besides certain apps that you want to be installed on that iPhone, right? These users could include employees, vendors, contractors, and even visitors coming to the company. Acceptable use policies typically cover all computer use, including any kind of portable devices. And the AUPs usually provide explicit prohibitions regarding security and proprietary information. You also want to make sure DLP or the loss protection measures and applications are on these devices. And also unacceptable use may be outlined in the acceptable use policy document, letting them know what is unacceptable and what they cannot actually do while they're using company property. You also have organizational policies on a higher level. Several policies relate to the management and functioning of the organization. Like you have the change management for, say, if if a team wants to change a configuration on the Active Directory server, they have to go through this change management policy, which defines a change control process, right? And in that change control process, they have to propose the change. That change should be reviewed by certain authorities or SMEs, and then that should be approved. And that one then is going to go through scrutinizing of the asset management. What is the impact of that change on the assets and all that? And then after the change is happening, it's going to get documented for future references. And also that is going to feed into different other plans that the company has. For, say, if you have a change happening in the network, let's say you're changing your firewalls from Cisco to F5 of Palo Alto. Now you need to go and update your other plans, such as business continuity and disaster recovery, and all of those goodies should be updated, right? This is how the change management process and the change control process make sure everything necessary is going to happen. So that's how these organizational policies help your resiliency and business continuity. You also have data policies. They all start with the classification policy, which is a written policy that labels and categorizes information. Usually you have restricted, confidential, public, internal, or off of those data categorizations, which through the labels of data classification, you can make sure those specific classification of data are being treated appropriately. You also have data governance policy, which is a series of formal guidelines regarding the data itself and how it is being handled. You also have data retention policy, which specifies how long the data should be retained after it has fulfilled its purpose. Usually legal rules and constraints have a big impact on the data retention policies, especially if you are in a regulated or heavily regulated business. You possibly are going to be dealing with a lot of data retention policies, which is still is going to help your business continuity. Because if you're being audited and you're being questioned for that specific type of data and you don't have it, a business impact is going to happen, right? I think that's a good time to take over a knowledge check activity. The manager of your company is concerned that the finances are at risk because Jane, the accountant, is the only person in the organization that has responsibility over the money that goes in and out of the business. What policy should he put in place to ease his concern? And the answer is separation of duties. Okay, let's go over what we covered in this video. Business continuity is an organization's ability to maintain its operations and services in the face of a disruptive event. IT contingency planning involves developing an outline of procedures to follow in the event of the major IT incident or an incident that directly impacts IT. One way to prevent certain issues from crippling an enterprise is to incorporate resilience, also called fault tolerance, into IT systems. Most network hardware components can be duplicated to provide a redundant network. The most important redundancy is that of data itself, which is accomplished through data backups. A policy is a document that outlines the specific requirements or rules that must be met. Several policies relate to the matters of personnel, including separation of duties, job rotation, mandatory vacation, clean desk space, list privilege, onboarding and offboarding, and acceptable use policy. Several policies relate to management and functioning of organization as a whole, like change management policy, change control policy, and asset management policy. A data classification policy identifies types of data. With that being said, we're going to stop the recording here.